Okay, so what we're going to be doing is looking at Robert Burns' To a Louse, and um, this poem, sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole in terms of like research. Got me looking at flipping parasitism and a whole bunch of other things, to try and understand exactly, lice and so on. So what I want to begin with, what I'd like to begin with is just a quick sort of summary, I guess, of kind of, what I discovered, or I guess a little bit of a summary into the idea of a louse or a lice. So, a louse essentially is the obvious singular of the word lice, like head lice, or lice that you have, like your dog gets lice or your cat might get, I don't know if cats get lice, but your dog can have lice, that kind of thing, huh? So essentially a lice or a louse, okay, is a form of parasite. And a parasite is essentially a type of insect that lives, okay, on the body of the thing that what it's called, the host. Essentially, it's a type of animal, an insect, which and you can have also parasitical uh things which are not insects, like for example, there's types of mushrooms which are parasitical. In any case, it's a thing, an organism which lives on another organism, and essentially it lives at the expense of another organism. You also get parasitical people. These would be people who like live at the expense of other people. For example, like in a sense, you kind of think of like pimps in this way. A pimp is a sort of a parasite in that the pimp sort of lives at the expense of the woman that who he has working for him, or he's exploiting, if you want to put it that way. Um, you could also in turn think about women who trick men into sending them money. That would be another sort of parasite, I guess, in a way. Women that lives yet at the expense of men who are in love with her, but she has no care for them, but she lives at the expense of their money. In any case, excuse me, in any case, the point of a parasite is that a parasite is something that feeds on something or lives on something, lives at the expense of something else. And the parasite uh, exists by essentially stealing from or exploiting the thing that it lives on or the person that it lives on. Okay, so a lice is like this. A lice or a louse, sorry, is like this. A louse, uh, in terms of humans, lives on the person, sucking their blood or eating, like, dead skin, as gross as that is, and then planting its eggs, which we call nits, on the hair, and then the eggs grow again, and new lice are born. Okay, now this sets the tone. Okay, this nicely sets the tone for the poem itself, because I was trying to think, what is it? Why would he bother writing a poem to a louse? Yeah, it's a bit weird. Why would you write a poem to a parasite, to an insect? Okay. But this nicely sets the tone. Okay, if we're thinking about this poem as a sort of critique or a class critique, a critique of societal structure, then the poem begins to make sense very nicely. Okay, so in this poem, essentially Burns, from my view, I'm going to give you my interpretation of the poem. In my view, what Burns is doing in this poem, okay, is that he is essentially critiquing two different things. One is that he's going to critique the sort of uh not necessarily hypocritical, but the sort of false, that's a better way to put it, the false image put on by sort of people who have maybe more money, um the false image of being sort of better than other people or being above other people, the false superiority as put on by those who have access to more money, and therefore they can buy like fancy clothes and therefore appear to be better, or have the energy, or have the what do you call it? Demeanor or the beliefs, thoughts that they are better than other people who can't afford the same fancy clothes. So it's a critique in that regard, appearance versus the reality, and that these people are not better than the people that they're around, but they're sort of fake in a way, or that they are, yeah, lying in a way because the louse, the insect, is on the head, not of a homeless person or of a poor person, but on the head and the clothing of a seemingly wealthy person, a rich woman. So there's one critique. Now, the other critique, excuse me, the other critique, which is also present in the poem and which comes to us more so from the angle of the parasite idea, which I laid out a minute ago. The other critique, okay, is that you can essentially look, and this is obviously a very classic, classic idea. You can look at the wealthy or the rich as being, in some sense, parasitical to the people around them. This would be, you could think of it like a Marxian critique or a socialist critique, something like that. Um, so you could read this poem as that the woman herself is like a louse, huh? She is like a parasite, or being sort of a member of the upper class, an upper class landowner. I don't know if she's actually explicitly laid out as a landowner, but an upper class landowner, someone who has property and, excuse me, exploits the poor to maintain that property, doesn't pay them very well. Again, these are all just assumptions that I'm making. I don't have any proof for these, but I'm giving you the perspective that you could take, the critique that you could take. These are the assumptions. So the woman is a wealthy. We don't know the source of her wealth, but she's wealthy in some way. And we know major sources of wealth at this time. One of them was slavery. Interesting fact, Robert Burns himself participated in administration related to slavery. So his morality is a bit, iffy. We need to question that. He worked for some time for a slave owner or a plantation owner which had slaves on it. Because he was able to read and write, he was able to work. I forget the exact position, but he was like a clerk, I think clerk. He was at like an administrative position over some slaves. So his ethics or whatever is iffy. But in any case, in the poem, you could take it. The critique would be that this woman herself, she is herself like a parasite living on the backs of the poor or the people who, have less money than her. The equivalent would be like in the Corn Gatherers with Lady Runcie Campbell and her estate essentially being propped up or being only existing due to the fact that people that are, essentially in poverty, like the Corn Gatherers, being forced to work for her, for little pay because they don't really have many options. In Barnes's time, it would be something like he himself, how he had to work, many manual labor type of jobs before eventually he was able to be successful. So the critique would be, excuse me, the critique would be that of the wealthy themselves. And again, this would be like a, I guess, a proto-socialist or I don't know if I don't know exactly when Marx. I'm not very educated in socialism or Marxism. I don't know if you know in times of time period chronologically if Marx is how far he is away from this. Um, I have read though that people do consider Burns to be an influence in terms of socialist thinking and socialism overall. So and also Burns was extremely popular in Russia. Um, and he has been extremely popular in Russia, which is obviously one of the main centers of socialism. But anyway, the point is that you could take the view that the woman herself is a parasite and she represents a sort of parasitical class. Okay. I'll maybe critique this idea once we get into the poem a bit more. I'll query it a bit once we get into the thing anymore. But anyway, those are the two basic views you can take if you like, or the two basic ways, lenses that you can take on the poem. So again, one is you can look at the poem as a critique of the appearance of the wealthy versus the reality that this woman herself is actually, not very clean. She's not what she's dressing up and appearing to be because the insect is on her head, not on the homeless or not on some other person, normal or average person's head. It's on her head. That's one, that she's putting on a false image, false appearance. And then the other critique would be that she herself is a parasite and that it's a socialist critique of the wealthy, basically. Okay, so what I've put here the translation of the lines, okay, just because it makes it a bit easier to read. Um, and obviously behind where I had my behind my what do you call it, video camera. This is a louse. This is what it looks like. Okay, so let's begin. Let's begin. Ha, where you gone, you crowling fairly? Your impudence protects you sarely. I canna say, but you strunt rarely. Or gauze and lace. Though faith I fear you dinny but sparely on sic a place. Ye ugly creeping blasted oner, detested shunned by sont and sinner. How dare you set your fit upon her? Say fine a lady, gay somewhere else and seek your dinner on some poor body. Okay, so what's happening in the beginning of this poem? What's happening in the beginning of the poem is that he essentially is again addressing the louse, and he is saying he's establishing that the louse is on the head of the woman. Okay, and he's saying that uh he's shocked to see the louse is on her head, and he tells the louse to go somewhere else and to not be sort of walking around on her head. Excuse me. Now, excuse me. Now, what he does, what he does is he uses he uses a lot of humor in this in his lines. In that it's almost like he's being sort of sarcastic, and he's making his point about the woman in that she has a louse on her head, but he's saying it in such a way that he can't really be accused of being like rude, or he can't be accused of being sort of openly critical of the upper class, or openly critical of the woman herself. Um, but he's being sort of clever about it. He's pretending as if he's on the woman's side, and he's acting as if he's really offended by this insect being on her head. But what he's doing essentially is he's just laying out the idea that the insect is on her head, and he's eating he's eating from the woman's head, and he is, running around over gauze and lace means her clothing. He's running around over the fancy hat that she's wearing, and um, he's establishing that he is definitely on, or the insect is definitely on the woman's head, the rich woman's head, and not on some poor person's head. Huh? He's establishing that the insect has chosen her specifically. Okay, he goes on to say, sweat in some beggars half at Scotland, there you may creep and sprawl and spraddle with other kindred jumping cattle. Excuse me, in shoals and nations, where horn nor bane ne'er door unsettle your thick plantations. Now haud you there, you're out of sight, below the fat rolls snug and tight. Na faith ye yet, you'll no be right, till you've no got on it, the very topmost tower and height of Mrs. Bonnet. So I'll quickly find yourself in some beggar's chair, there you may crawl and sprawl and chatter with a da da da. Now hold yourself there, you're out of sight, below the hat rim, snug and tight. So what he's saying, okay, to the louse is that it would be more proper if you were in the hair of some beggar, some homeless person. That's where you're expected to be. It doesn't it's shocking, surprising that you're in the hat, you're in the hair, you're in the clothing of some rich woman, of some proper well-to-do woman, and he's essentially uh he's laying out here kind of what I mentioned before, that the insect is in the hair or clothing of the wealthy woman, the woman that is sort of supposed to be upper class, and it's not near the beggar or the other poor or say working class or average person in the church. This is taking place in a church, by the way, this story. Um, so again, it's a sort of critique in that saying that the wealthy one is the one that has something wrong with her, and the insect is feeding on her because she is the one that is, quote unquote, dirty in some way. She is the one who has some kind of thing that the insect is attracted to in some way, in terms of like it's her head, her hair is a place of dirtiness, nastiness, something like that. Essentially, it's like an ethical critique. You understand? It's like an ethical kind of critique that it's leaving alone the beggar or the average person, the working class, whatever normal person in the church, and it's specifically attacking the what do you call it? This rich woman. So again, laying out the critique that the woman, though she looks as if she's very clean and as if she's very, well-to-do and so on, but she has something wrong with her, and the thing that's wrong with her is hidden. It's hidden. It's hidden beneath the fancy clothing and the pomp of her dress and everything else, and the bigness of her hat. Uh, and if we take the other perspective, which I began with, then making the distinction between the rich and the poor, uh, and again associating the parasite with the rich and not the poor, saying that you should be with the poor, and why are you not jumping around on the beggar's head? You'd be more comfortable there. Why are you jumping around on this rich woman's head? Again, sort of laying out the idea that it is the rich woman who is the parasite, not the beggar, but the rich woman. The beggar is just, he's broke. He's not a parasite, he's broke. Critiquing, I guess, in one sense, critiquing the sort of idea that the poor place a burden on society, that the beggar would be normally seen as the parasite, right? Go get a job would be the normal thing people would say to a beggar. Go get a job. Why are you homeless? So Burns is taking this. Again, this is just in my view. Burns is taking this and he's reversing it and instead saying it's not the beggar and the homeless who is the parasite, but it is the wealthy woman who is the parasite. That essentially she has, and again, this is like the socialist kind of perspective. She has only acquired her wealth through exploitation, being like a parasite on the back of the society, the 99%, being a parasite on them, sucking their blood, and then being able to manifest that with a life. So rich at the expense of the poor. That's like the socialist kind of critique, if you want to take that view. Okay, so he goes on to say, yes. Okay. So he goes on to say, my suit. Okay, I'll just read. No, if I should actually, I shouldn't read from the translation, but okay, fine. My suit, right bold, you set your nose out and plump and grey as oni grossa. Oh, for some rank Mercurial Rosette. So he's saying I would kill this little thing with mercury. Excuse me, I'd kill this little thing with mercury or red pepper. I'd give you a sick hearty dose of it. Would dress your drodom, your nose, I think is what that means. I would give you a hearty dose of it, smarten you up. Um, I wouldn't be surprised to spy out you on an old wife's flannan toy, flannel cap. So he's saying that I would have expected you to be on some old woman's flannel cap. Flannel probably some cheap, like cheap material, or some little ragged boy on his patch coat. Again, you were supposed to be on the poor, but here you are on Missy's very fancy hat. So the type of hat is described there, Leonardi, is this kind of hat. Yeah, the big one, big, very obviously expensive hat. This. Okay. How dare you do it? So again, sort of continuing the idea that he is. And again, from my reading, I would say that he's just, he's mocking the woman, his innocence. He's pretending. He's like sort of full surprised. He's pretending as if he's surprised to see the, what do you call it, louse on the woman's head. And he's mocking surprise and mocking that he is like, shocked and that he would prefer if the mouse, not the mouse, the louse is on the head of some poor person. Um, Whereas in reality, again, it's a critique, I would say, of the woman herself or what she represents. Um, and he's also pretending as if he would kill the, what do you call it, the louse, uh, with mercurial ointment, essentially a type of poison, or red pepper. Excuse me. You're quite bold to set your nose out as plump and as grey as any gooseberry. Again, if you take the reading that the woman herself is the parasite, in other words, the louse and the woman are one and the same, they're both parasites, then he is essentially again critiquing the woman herself and that she's sort of he's making fun of her, how she looks, that her nose is sticking out in some kind of way, and it's like fat in some kind of way because she's obviously eating a lot of food due to the excess wealth and resources that she has access to, and that he'd like to give her some mercury or some red pepper. um Again, if that's if you want to take the sort of socialist, I guess you could call it the more extreme kind of perspective of this poem. You could read it in that way. Okay, now he goes on. This is the final line. Oh, Jenny, dinna test, dinna toss your head and set your beauties abread. You little ken what cursed speed that blast he's making. The winks and finger ends I dread are notice taken. I would some power give day, gie us to see ourselves, others see us, and it would. Frae mony a blunder free us, and foolish notion, what errors in dressing gate would leave us, and even devotion. So, the last sort of section of the, excuse me, the last sort of section of the poem, in a sense, gives more credence, I'd say, to the first, reading of it, the first perspective of it, in that it is, to say that he says if he wishes some power would be able to give us the ability to see ourselves as other people see us. And again, that leads very strong evidence to the perspective in terms of the reading that uh he's critiquing the way that the woman is dressed and the way the woman is acting. She's tossing her hair around and she's showing off her beauty. She's making a big big sort of show of, her fancier clothes look and everything. He's saying that if she could see herself the way that he sees her, she would not do that because she'd be like embarrassed and she would see like how fake it seems and how silly it seems and how essentially the costume that she's wearing is that it's a costume and people can see that it's a costume. Um, Now there's some there's an attached um there's an attached concept to this reading, the reading that she's putting on a show, she's fake in some way, and that concept is that excuse me, is the idea that and this is something that I came across in my sort of research for this. The idea is that he's putting forward the idea that because the clothes and the way of acting and all that, it's just a costume. Therefore, the woman underneath, she is essentially just the same as him and everyone else. It's a sort of promotion of the idea of universal equal value, essentially, that no person is better than any other person. It doesn't matter if they call themselves a king or a queen, etc., etc. We're all just the same. We're all essentially equal. We're all fundamentally equal. There is no any superiority between one person and another, no any inferiority between one person and another. But we're all just the same, regardless of what fancy clothes we wear. It doesn't change anything. Even a rich, fancy, very, very well dressed up fancy woman can have head lice, right? Which means that she's just like every other person. She's just like the homeless person that she might make fun of. She's just the same as him because she too has head lice like he has. So they're the same. So I'd say that would be probably in terms of which reading has more evidence to it, I'd probably say that reading has more evidence. Though even that reading in itself does bring out or does hint towards or knock on the door of the socialist reading, in that one of the primary principles of socialism, as far as I understand it, is the innate equality of human beings, in that every person is the same. Therefore, we should have no we should have no authority above us. Now, of course, practically speaking, this never happens. When you centralize authority and centralize power, you create a king worse than any other king that you ever could imagine. You create a god, excuse me, you create a man who believes he's God, or a group of men who believe they're God in the act, like a god killing and destroying. So the practical application of socialism always leads to this, because anytime you centralize power in the hands of a few, you end up with tyranny, essentially. And anytime you place the group, the welfare of the group above the welfare of the individual, you end up with tyranny, essentially. You can't escape this. Okay, so uh, in any case, now let me critique the. So there's the readings of the poem. Essentially, it's about the woman. She's got a louse on her head, and the basic understanding is that we're all the same, pretty much. It doesn't really matter if you wear fancy clothes or not. You can still have head lice, so we're all the same. Okay, now the other reading is that the woman herself is a parasite. The rich are parasites on society. The rich are parasites on the world. On the 1% is a parasite to the 99%, and all these ideas are coming back today, and they've always been. I think that, to be honest, they've always been quite popular. Because there is sort of, there's always been sort of forms of inequality, and inequality has a real big impact on people's lives. So let's talk about this idea. Let's talk about this idea, okay, about the rich being parasites on everyone else. So I'd say, I'd say in terms of this idea, I'd say this idea, we have to look at it from, it's complicated. We have to look at it from a couple different, perspectives, lenses. So one thing we have to try and understand, okay, is that um um is we need to try and understand, first of all, what is rich? What does that mean to be rich? I don't want to make it too complicated, but if we just think about it, in a very simple way, we can just think about, if we're talking resources and money, rich would just be the person who has more resources than the majority, or than most other people. That would be rich. So the amount of money can change depending on, if you're in a room with children and you have £10, and you're in a room with 5-year-olds, you're the richest person in that room, basically, because kids don't have any money yet. But then if you walk into another room and everyone in that room has, and you're in another room with a I don't know, an engineer or something, and he has £50,000 and you have £10, now he is the rich person in the room. And then if that engineer walks into another room with the owner of his company, the company that he works at, and his boss essentially has £500,000, then his boss is the rich one and the engineer is poor. And then if the boss walks into a room with one of the investors in the company, and the investor has 5 million, then he's poor and the investor is rich. The investor goes into another room with excuse me, I don't know, someone who invests in multiple companies or something. And it goes on and on and on. The point is that wealth is relative, and rich and poor is also relative. Yeah, it was the first important point. So the problem, and this is very important, it's fundamental to recognize this, because it's hard to identify who is rich and who is not rich. Understand? It's hard to identify who is actually rich and who is not, and where do we cut off who's rich and who's not. And this is one of the primary reasons why, when we have socialism or communism or Marxism put into place, this is why it turns out so violent. One of the primary reasons why it turns out so violent, so many people die, is because it's hard to cut off who is the rich and who is not. Do you understand? Because, like I said, depending on who is doing the measuring, who's doing the comparison, someone again with £5 could be seen as rich. Someone with £50,000 could be seen as rich. Someone with £5 million could be seen as rich. You understand? So depending on who's doing the measuring, it makes it difficult. Like, for example, even if you took, someone might say, well, just stick to the billionaires, right? Okay, well, if you take the billionaires, who among the billionaires is rich? Is it all of them? Okay, but some of them have 1 billion, some of them have 200 billion. That's a huge difference, right? So is it all of them, or is it what? Okay, fine, you say all of them, fine. Okay, take all the billionaires, you take away all their wealth, fine, or you take away most of their wealth. Okay, do we stop there? And that's it. What about the people who have 500 million? That's a lot of money now. More money than most people have. Most people, excuse me, if you're a millionaire, you're in the top, 1% of the world, right? Pretty much. If you look at global wealth allocation, if you have £1 million, you're in the top 1%, of the world. So if you have 500 million, well, what do we do with those people? Do we tax them more heavily? Do we put them in? What do we do? And you could keep going down like that until maybe you or me, maybe you or me could be considered rich. Yeah, that's the problem here. That's the fundamental issue. So I'd say that's the problem with when we try to enact, any kind of violent or any kind of, extreme kind of political philosophy in regards to punishing the rich. Um, so there's one issue, but then the other issue is what about wealth? Where does wealth come from, and how do people become rich and wealthy? So there is the genuine problem that people can inherit wealth, and wealth can be passed from one generation to another in terms of a family, and families can become extremely wealthy, sort of just by passing on it. The kids didn't do anything to earn it; they just take it on. They just inherit it essentially. And and maybe the grandparents of these people, for example, people talk about reparations and slavery. Maybe the grandparents of these people made their money from slavery, for example, or they made their money from exploiting cheap labor in the form of like serfs who worked on the farm. They didn't really have a job. This is what they do, and they were born into it. Excuse me. So it's complicated, but then it gets more complicated because what do you do if you say that you can't, what's the word, bequeath? You can't inherit, people can't inherit money from their parents. Then you have then you have then you have a serious problem in that if you tell people you cannot give money to your children, excuse me, you take away one of the main motivational and one of the main incentives for people trying to make money in the first place, right? Most people, I would say, the reason they want to become wealthy is if not for themselves, it's for their children. You understand? They want to make something so that their children can have a better life. And part of that is an inheritance, right? They want to give their kids some money so that they can have a better start in life, especially people who grew up without much money because they know how hard it is to grow up without money, right? They understand how difficult it is to grow up without wealth. So they want to make sure that their children have a better start than they had. And so that's how it goes on. And that's a good thing, right? You want to help. So anyway, the point is it's complicated. The point is it's complicated. Um, what do you do? I don't know. The point is it's complicated. I don't know. Um, how do you solve this inequality? I don't know. One of the things that I can say is philosophically, just understanding that the rich and the poor are fundamentally equal in terms of value. I think that's really important. We shouldn't give special rules or special privileges to the rich or people who have more money comparison to the poor. We shouldn't give them special treatment. I think that's important. That's definitely true. I think that excuse me. I think that the people who are poor, comparatively speaking, they should be given, help. They should be given education, or they should be assisted. And it would be ideal if the people who are rich, who had more and had money to spare, if they could be encouraged to do that. But I don't think the use of force is good. Me personally, my own little way that I'm trying to help, besides these lectures that I'm doing, I'm releasing for free. Obviously, would prepare to pass. The website I made, I've got now. Excuse me, I don't know if it's like 100, maybe more than 100. It's probably more than 100 now. Yeah, it's definitely more than 100. Maybe 150, maybe 200 almost. I don't know. Kids that are learning for free on the entire National 5 or higher course, excuse me, for free. There's no upsell, there's no anything, but they're learning for free, and hopefully they'll be able to pass their English exam, and by doing that, they'll be able to get a place, either in college or university, and then by doing that they'll be able to improve their situation. So that's the way I'm doing it. Hopefully, when I level up even more, I'll be able to do more. But it's a complex problem. It's definitely complex. But it's definitely a lot to think about. Huh? It's something to think about.